Hello everyone and welcome to another devlog video for the procedural city generator. Today I am super excited to show you guys my progress with the new Sidewalk system coming to PCG in the 1.2 update. So for this example, I just have a very small city here. I'm going to zoom all the way down here. I'm going to make the camera a little bit faster. And we're going to pick up one of these plots here. And it's going to be a space between any of these roads. And all I need to do is drag and drop this new blueprint called BP generated plot. I'm going to kind of drop it in the middle here. And then we're going to go through a lot of these settings here, but all we want to do first is we are going to trace the shape. And this is basically tracing for that custom shape, which in this case is just a rectangle. Then we simplify the spline. We don't need that many points here. Then we're going to adjust our points, which is going to get the spline a little bit closer to the rows to try to fit that shape as best as possible. And we're going to create the mesh. And now, if I zoom down here, you can see that we have basically a procedural mesh using geometry scripting that matches that shape. If I click play here, you can see that it's obviously very simple. We just have a mesh with a custom material. Now you may be wondering, why am I using a spline? And the reason for that is to give us control over the shape. This is actually a procedural mesh, so the spline is simply a way for us to manipulate the vertices that are going to be used for that mesh. So if I grab any of the spline points here and move it, you can see that the plot shape is actually changing based on how I'm moving the spline point here. So this is a way for us to manipulate the shape and create any shape we want based on how complicated our plot shape will be. There are a lot of things that we can change here. So if I click on the blueprint here and I go to the plot setup here, the first thing I want to show you guys is that we have a height value here. So right now it's 20 units, but I can make this obviously anything I want. So 20 is the default. I figure it's kind of the standard height for a sidewalk, but we can make this like 50, for example, and you can see that it's much higher here. You can make this pretty much anything you want. We're going to go back and change this to 20. So you can change the plot height for the entire plot. You can also actually generate the sidewalks here. So if I go all the way up here and I click on generate sidewalk, you can see that now we have a sidewalk that has been generated on the corners here. And you'll see that there's a small bug here that I have to fix, which is we have two very close spline points. If I remove them, you can see that the shape is now correct. So that's one of the things that I still need to work on. You can see on the corners, and that causes that deformation there. So I'm going to just remove this here to fix. There you go. To fix it in this case. And you can see that we have a sidewalk. So if I click play, now we have the plot having one material and the sidewalk being on the edges. That looks a little bit more like a standard city where you have a sidewalk with a separate material or a separate configuration and then the plot in the middle. Now for the sidewalks themselves, we actually can configure a bunch of different things. So if I go to the sidewalk section here, you can see that we have a specific mesh that we can use. So right now I'm using a spline mesh to generate the mesh on top. And that means that you can use a simple cube like I'm using here, like a simple rectangle, or you can use any mesh you want to give it more texture or anything at all that you wanted. So it's very customizable. You can also customize the width scale of the sidewalk. So in this case, again, the default value is 2 for like an American city. But if you want to make the sidewalk really narrow, you can change this value here. You can see that we have a much more narrow sidewalk. Or we can make it a lot more wide. So like a 3 or like a 5. So if you have a perhaps like a city center with really wide sidewalks because you want a lot of people, pedestrians, to go up and down, you can easily make this a lot wider. So you can customize the width and you can also customize the height scale. So right now, this sidewalk piece is pretty much just slightly taller than the actual plot, but you can make this taller. So I can make this like 1.5, and you can see that now we have a little bit more of an elevation if this is what you want, or you can again make this any value you want. This is looking more like almost like a small pool if you want at this point, but you have control over how high you want that scaling to be. I'm gonna go back to normal, and then you have things like tangent length, which I'm not gonna go over. This is depending on what kind of static mesh you're using. You might want to play with this value here to make sure that it does look smooth on the corners. Another thing you'll notice is that every time we generate this, we seem to generate it with different materials. And again, I wanted to add some randomness here because we're generating this in a procedural way. So if I just like click auto generate mesh and click it again, you'll see that we are picking random materials for both the plot and the sidewalks here. And if I go to the sidewalk here, you can see that we have a sidewalk material list. So every single time this is generated, we're picking a random material from here. And the same thing is for the plot, which you can see here for the plot. We have 3 different materials that we're picking. So you can quickly add a variety when you're spawning all of these plots along your city by giving each plot a slightly different material. Or if you want to have a very specific material for one of these plots, you can actually use a manual material. So you can see that both the plot and the sidewalks have a manual plot material. So in this case, it's going to be like the light asphalt. And if we go to the sidewalk, we have the manual sidewalk material being this like standard beige. And you can see that it's going to be different. So if I go down here and I click on set materials, then we are going to use those specific manual materials that we specified there. So if you're generating this procedurally and you want all of your different sidewalks and plots to have random materials to make the city a little bit more interesting, you can do that. But if you want to customize a specific plot, then you can use this set materials there. You'll notice that we also have a button for spawning props. So now that we have a plot with a sidewalk, obviously the most obvious thing would be to put our buildings here, right, and have a sidewalk. But if you wanted to spawn specific props and not buildings, you can also do that. So there is a section here for props, and you can see that in this case we have a list of props. And if I expand one of these, a lot of these settings are going to be very familiar to what we have on the zone. So I used a lot of the same logic that I used on the zones to spawn our props to have it here. You can either have a class, which takes priority, or a static mesh. You have specific collision bounds that you can add here. You can have a scale range, a min and max. You have a spawn range, which is like how many per click. So it's, in this case, you're only going to spawn like 1 fountain. And you want it to align to the surface. And in this case, would you want to spawn in the center of the plot? So sometimes if you want to have like a little plaza, you may want to have like a centerpiece and then other random things around it. In this case, we have like this fountain that we want it to be like the centerpiece, but you don't have to mark it this way. I also have a statue here, which I also have it as the centerpiece with a specific % chance to spawn. So this is like 30% and this is 50% for the fountain. So either the fountain will spawn or the statue will spawn, but both of them will not spawn because they're both either spawned in the center. And then you have things like this foliage that can spawn not in the center but randomly with a scale range of 0.6 and 1.1 and between 3 and 7. So let's see what that looks like, right? So you can obviously customize the pawns. You can have an inner spawn buffer, that is the buffer of units in between the plot area and the sidewalk. So the bigger this buffer, that means that the more centered all of your plot, your props will be. So if I just click on spawn props here, you can see that in this case, the fountain spawned kind of in the middle, and we had some trees spawn. And I'm just going to click on spawn props a few more times here. And you can see that we have some trees and then we have some benches. But we have this fountain as the centerpiece here. And obviously this is customizable. You can change the % chance to spawn. You can change how many trees do you want to spawn. But in this case, that's good enough. You can see that we have like a little plaza in the middle of our city. And obviously, if this is what you intend to do, there is a setting which says right here, can spawn buildings. So in this case, you would say false. So when we're generating our city and spawning our buildings, we are not going to spawn any buildings on this plot here, because obviously we want to spawn our props. All right. So one more thing that I want to show you guys, I'm going to remove these props here, is that obviously we are tracing the specific shape, but if we wanted to have this as a separate island, say that we wanted to have this somewhere else in our city or give it a specific shape, we actually can do that, right? We can just drop this here in the middle of the city, and we can click on manual plot, and automatically we are going to create a spline with, in this case, just 4 corners that we can then manipulate and use to create our own shape. Otherwise, we are going to either trace the shape, which is going to be probably 95% of the cases. You just want to match the shape in between rows. But if you want to have something specific, you can just do it manually. So in this case, you can actually add spline points. You can see that we're kind of making a random shape here. It doesn't really matter. And then once you're done, you can just click on create mesh. And we have mesh. And the same thing, we can generate our sidewalks. And you see that we have a sidewalk here. And sometimes you'll see this little issue here, and that is because we don't have enough spline points. So if I add a spline point here and I kind of move it this way, you can see that now we have fixed that issue. So we do need a certain amount of spline points to make the sidewalk generate correctly. Or you can increase the scale, which will eventually fix that problem. All right. So great. So you can see here that the goal is to fill out the plots to match the shape in between the rows, but right now we're basically dragging and dropping. So that's one of the things that I wanted to solve, was to make sure that we added our plots and our tracing was good enough that would get pretty close to the shapes that we wanted to. But I also wanted to create a way to procedurally spawn these plots. So you can see now on the road side here, we have a new tab called Sidewalks. And if I click here, we have 2 subtabs, or 2 ways of spawning our plots. We have a manual mode and we have a procedural mode. And we're going to use the manual mode first. So we spawn our manager, which already is spawned, and we're going to make sure that it is active. And now while it is active, we're actually going to press play. And as soon as we press play, you see that we have a sidewalk manager mode, which we are actually looking at our city from a top-down view. We can change the camera mode from perspective to orthographic. We can zoom in and out. And the point of this mode is that it's going to allow us to quickly show where we want to spawn our sidewalks. So we're literally just going to click. And as we click, you can see that we have some markers. And if we want to remove it, we just click on it again. So say that we wanted to spawn these 3 right here. And if we wanted to move, we right click to a different place. And you can see that we're actually moving around our map. So if you want to be very specific where you want to spawn your sidewalks, you can use this mode and specifically click where you want your sidewalks and your plots to be. Then when you're done, you simply stop playing. And I'm actually going to save those locations inside a game save object. And then right now, then I can click on spawn plots. And you can see that we've actually spawned the plots where we click. Then I can click on generate plots. And it's going to take a little bit here. And it's then going to immediately generate our sidewalk plots. And then we can just click on select plots. And with everything selected, we can come here and then click on generate sidewalks, for example. And we can then configure it any way we want. Obviously, you see that I have this issue that I need to fix on the corner. But by and large, this is a pretty quick way of specifically targeting where you want these plots to be. And why would you, if you're thinking like, why would I care about specific areas? So the reason I did this is because you may have an area in your city, say a rural area, where you don't want plots, right? Say that you will have a residential area or a rural area where you don't want to generate any plots, obviously you wouldn't target that. Or maybe you just have a specific city center where you want those plots to be. So you can use the manual mode for that purpose. But in the case of having a city where you want most of your city to have these plots, then you would use the procedural mode. And in this case, I'm going to reset the batch. It's going to look very similar to spawning the auto roads here, where you're going to go through all of the different rows and you're going to spawn these plots. So in this case, I'm going to start with a side road here, and I click the button. I'm going to show the stats here. I click again. And as I'm clicking, you can see that we are spawning these plots. And I'm not going to spawn the whole city here, but you can see that it is batched. As I am clicking around, my plots are being filled. I am tracing for custom shapes, and I'm going to go down here. And you can see here that I have a few things that I've taken kind of the liberty of doing. For example, in this case, this is the end of this road, and this is the end of this road. So I just decided to kind of make it this shape, because you may have some buildings here and here. So there are some things that I'm still kind of playing around with how I want to handle these edge cases here. Another thing I could do is like basically extend this all the way here and make it always make it a square. But that doesn't really make sense if the road ends here. So there's obviously a lot of different things that I still kind of need to figure out how I want to handle it. But for the most part, I think that makes sense. You want to match end of the road with end of the road here, and this is what you're seeing here. So that is pretty much what I have right now. There's some additional changes that I still need to make. As you can see, the tracing is not 100%. There's a few little bugs like the corner issue here that I showed you guys earlier, and a few other things that I'm playing around with as to how I want to trace and generate that shape. But again, the goal is to try to preserve the algorithm that I use for the roads, because I feel like I have a lot of flexibility on my road algorithm, and I don't want to restrict that just so I can generate the plot. So I'm kind of working within those bounds, assuming that it can be almost any shape possible, which is why I'm doing the tracing. And then I have ways of tracing it, simplifying it, kind of adjusting it here, and then creating the mesh. And at the end of the day, you can always come here and make manual adjustments. So even if it's not 100% perfect, you can always come here, make the adjustments that you want, and make sure that the plots are looking the exact same way. So that is pretty much it, guys. Obviously, after you would spawn your entire city, then you would go back and spawn your buildings, and then your props and your foliage, and that is how you would obviously generate the city, by having those plots and sidewalks. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you like the approach I'm taking? Do you have any suggestions about some specific use cases? Are you excited for 1.2? I am feeling like I am getting to the point where I just have a little bit more to go for all those big features, and I think it'll be ready to go. World partition is almost done. I just have a few little things. The sidewalk system and plot system, again, I spend a lot of time working on these two modes because they have specific use cases. So I'm almost done with these. I have a little bit more work to do on the tracing because, again, I have a few little bugs that I have to fix. But once that's done, I think 1.2 will be almost there, which I am very, very excited to finally send to you guys. So I hope you like where this is going. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.